Last week, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stood before the U.S. Congress in Washington and put the regime in Iran and its proxy fighters, Hezbollah and Hamas, on notice. Now, it wasn't a declaration of war, but it was as close as it gets. The word ceasefire was not uttered, not even once. Since then, two men, a Hezbollah commander and the political leader of Hamas, have been killed. Iran is blaming Israel and vowing revenge. The U.S. today said that it had no knowledge and no involvement in the killings. How is that possible? Tonight, America's influence over Israel, it looks mighty weak. Netanyahu's ability to keep his word does not. I'm Brent Goff in Berlin. This is The Day.
Israel will exact a heavy price for any aggression against us from any arena.
We condemn this brutal and painful operation.
The assassination of Haniyeh is great news, and I think it was supposed to happen.
I consider what happened in Iran to be a conspiracy. He met with the Iranian president, and then an Israeli attack happened.
I'm not going to speculate on what impact any one event might have.
Also coming up, trying for the positive spin. The U.S. says an escalation of the Middle East conflict is not inevitable and that a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas is still possible.
I think it's too soon to know what any of these reported events could mean for the ceasefire deal. But if I could add 2 points. One is that doesn't mean we're going to stop working on it. In fact, we have a team in the region right now as we speak to try to continue to work with our counterparts to move this forward because it's that important.
To our viewers watching on PBS in the United States and to all of you around the world, welcome. We begin the day with an angry and humiliated Iranian regime vowing to take revenge against Israel. On Wednesday, Iran announced the death of one of its closest allies, a top Hamas leader, Ismail Haniyeh, an assassination on Iranian soil that the regime immediately blamed on Israel. Haniyeh was in Tehran to attend the inauguration of the newly elected Iranian president. He was reportedly killed in a pre-dawn airstrike that could end up triggering an all-out war in the Middle East. After the October 7th terror attacks last year, Israel pledged to kill Haniyeh and other Hamas leaders. But today, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said nothing of Haniyeh's death, but he said Israel will exact a heavy price for any aggression against it on any front. In Tehran, we can only imagine the shock and disbelief. An airstrike that targeted a Hamas leader inside the Iranian capital has revealed massive failures by Iran's intelligence and its Republican National Guard. Add a new president to the equation, along with a regime that's still cracking down on domestic dissent, and you have a full-fledged crisis in the Islamic Republic for its leaders and for those proxy groups that allow Iran to wield power across the Middle East.
Ismail Haniyeh greets Iran's new president in what would be one of his last meetings. Just hours after attending the president's inauguration, he and his bodyguard were killed in a strike on his residence in Tehran.
We condemn this brutal and painful operation. God willing, with the efforts of the security forces, a report will be given to the people as soon as possible. My request is that necessary works be done so that those responsible don't feel like they can hurt us.
At the time of his death, Haniyeh was the political face of Hamas, the militant Islamist group that carried out the October 7th terror attacks on Israel. Hamas fighters killed around 1,200 people and took more than 250 others hostage, nearly half of whom are still held in Gaza. Haniyeh had not lived in Gaza for several years, but ran Hamas from Qatar, where he lived in exile. Born near a Gaza City refugee camp, the 62-year-old was the child of Palestinian refugees from the village of Al-Jura near Ashkelon. He joined Hamas when it was founded in 1987 and was arrested and jailed by Israel during the first Intifada, the uprising against Israeli occupation. Haniyeh was exiled to Lebanon, but he returned to Gaza following the 1993 Oslo peace accords. He became the Palestinian Prime Minister in 2006 and continued to rise through Hamas's ranks, eventually becoming its political chief in 2017. While Hamas's Gaza leader Yahya Sinwar is believed to have been the mastermind of the October 7th attacks, Haniyeh was seen as a more moderate force in Hamas. He has lost several of his own family members in Israeli attacks on Gaza, which have killed nearly 40,000 people since then. 3 of Haniyeh's sons and 4 of his grandchildren were killed in April. At the time, Haniyeh insisted their deaths would not affect ongoing ceasefire and hostage talks. Haniyeh represented Hamas internationally and moved around the region for diplomatic meetings. He was a key player in negotiations to stop the fighting in Gaza. Some fear his killing will be a major setback in achieving peace in the region.
Well, Israel has not claimed responsibility for Haniyeh's killing, but its Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, spoke today about an earlier strike on Beirut that killed a Hezbollah leader, Fuad Shukr. He said that killing and others had shown that Israel had delivered crushing blows to all of our enemies. Netanyahu said that his country is ready for whatever lies ahead.
Citizens of Israel, challenging days lie ahead. Since the strike in Beirut, there are threats sounding from all directions. We are prepared for any scenario, and we will stand united and determined against any threat. Israel will exact a heavy price for any aggression against us from any arena.
My first guest served 25 years in Israel's defense intelligence community, and that includes being head of its Iran research branch. She's now with the Atlantic Council and specializes in the Middle East, national security, and intelligence. I'm happy to welcome back to the program Danny Citrinowicz. Danny, it's good to see you again. It's good to have you on the program. You know as well as I do, the Middle East has been a powder keg for a long time. What do these 2 killings at the top of Hezbollah and Hamas, what do they mean for the risk of an all-out wider war breaking out?
Well, again, thank you for having me. And I think that, as described, I think rightly so, we are on the verge of severe escalation and even a regional war. I think those 2 events are putting us closer and closer. It's not only those 2 events, but the threats coming out from Tehran. And tomorrow we'll hear probably Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah talking about that as well. And I think that we are, if something, it won't be contained in a way that maybe intervened by the U.S. or other regional superpowers. I think that escalation is almost imminent. And I think that we are close as we ever been to a direct clash between Israel and Hezbollah, and definitely between Israel and Iran.
The closest that you've ever been, what needs to happen immediately to pull both sides back from the brink, in your opinion?
Unfortunately, I am not bearing of good news. I think there is not a thing that someone can take or do in order to prevent the reaction from Iran and Hezbollah, the retaliation against Israel for the killing of Fuad Shukr and Ismail Haniyeh. I think that Israel will have to absorb the strike, and then hopefully it will foil most of the attack, like what happened 14th of April. And then if we're able to foil it, then we'll maybe retaliate a limited response, and maybe we can contain it. But the real problem is the fact that it's not only even if we contain the current situation, we have to remember that without a ceasefire in Gaza, the tension will continue. And while both sides or all sides playing with fire, I think it's safe to assume that even if we contain the current escalation, the future one is just around the corner. But we are in a very volatile situation. And I hope that after the retaliation of Hezbollah and Iran, and there will be a retaliation, I think they climbed on a tree and they said that they will retaliate. I hope then the international community will intervene, pressuring both sides to contain a future retaliation, because if not, escalation, like I mentioned, imminent, and without someone that will be, at the end of the day, will be able to contain the current situation, we'll find ourselves in a full-stage war that nobody wants, but I think we are very close to be there.
Well, the Israeli Prime Minister, last week when he spoke in Washington, he gave a very long speech. He did not mention the word ceasefire once in his speech. And I know that Israel promised after the October 7th terror attacks to kill, Haniyeh and other Hamas leaders. But Haniyeh was also one of the main point men, one of the main people involved in the negotiations about a possible ceasefire and also about a possible hostage deal. So it doesn't look that like Israel really wants that ceasefire to take place. Is that your read on what Netanyahu wants?
Well, again, it's very hard. For me, it's easier really to analyze Iran than trying to analyze the Israeli political system, especially Netanyahu. Yeah. But I would say this. I think that Ismail Haniyeh, from the 7th of October, it was obvious that Israel will pinpoint it or him. But the main problem right now is, like you mentioned, is the fact that we have no other choice in that regard in terms of reaching a ceasefire. And I'm not sure that killing Ismail Haniyeh will get us closer to this promised land in terms of reaching that agreement. Haniyeh ran the negotiation from Hamas headquarters in Qatar. I think, unlike Sinwar, he was interested in a deal. Again, he is not a good man. He is a terrorist, a very bad man. But if you want to release our hostages, I think that killing Haniyeh, I'm not sure it's getting us closer to where we want to be. I think now we'll have to wait until they will appoint a new guy, hopefully a one that will push for a deal. So the bottom line of things, I think killing Haniyeh in general terms after 7th of October is something Israel inspired to do. But for the current situation, I'm not sure that killing him will promote deal. Unfortunately, I think that it will stall one, but we'll have to wait and see how things will develop towards the future. Yeah. But sadly, I'm very pessimistic for the chances for a deal in the current weeks and even months.
You say that you're not convinced that killing Haniyeh is going to be productive for Israel or for getting a ceasefire. The United States, the Secretary of State said today that the U.S. had no knowledge of the plan to kill Haniyeh and also was not involved in the plan. That's hard to believe, but if that is the truth, what does that tell us then about the relationship between Israel and its most important ally, the United States? And what does it tell us also about Washington's ability to influence Israel?
Well, I think both countries, of course, have strong cooperation between them, but both are independent. I think Israel has the independence to take the relevant decision in order to improve its security. But it goes without saying that Israel will need U.S. backup, especially if we are deteriorating into a war. And that is why I think it's imperative to make sure that the American administration know what Israel wants to do, know how Israel wants things to be developed. And I think we will be highly dependent on them after retaliation, whether going to war or using the U.S. to contain or to pressure Iran and Hezbollah through the Lebanese government not to escalate even further. Yeah. So I think in that regard, I don't think it's an indication how strong the cooperation is or the connection is. I think it's quite strong. But I think in that regard, I think the administration is highly worried that what Israel is doing right now will deteriorate the situation into a full-scale war. And I think they will pressure all sides to contain their activities towards the future.
Okay. Danny Citrinowicz, as always, we appreciate your time, appreciate your valuable analysis tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, immediately after the airstrike on Wednesday morning, Iran vowed to take revenge for the killing of Ismail Haniyeh. Now, he had come to Tehran for the inauguration of Iran's new president, Masoud Pezeshkian. The president today said that Iran will, quote, defend its territorial integrity, dignity, honor, and pride, and will make the terrorist occupiers regret their cowardly act. And in a statement read out on Iranian television, the country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, directly threatened Israel, claiming that it had laid the ground for a harsh punishment, and it was Tehran's duty to seek revenge for the killing of Ismail Haniyeh. Well, for more, I'm joined now by Ali Fathollah-Nejad, director of the Center for Middle East and Global Order. He joins me tonight from right here in Berlin. It's good to see you again. Iran promising to punish Israel, but within Iran's leadership, after the killing of Haniyeh in Tehran, do you think that there will be consequences for this failure in intelligence and national security inside Iran?
Well, in terms of consequences, I'm not sure. But then again, it's very clear that there have been such deficits and huge deficits in terms of providing security, in terms of air defenses. And it's quite a humiliation for the Iranian side. After all, Haniyeh was a top regime guest going to Tehran to attend the inauguration of the new Iranian president, Masoud Pezeshkian, and also meeting together with the head of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, with the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei. But then, the so powerful Islamic Republic of Iran was not able to protect one of his key allies and one of his top guests. So there is a lot of pressure now, in Iran to respond to that killing.
Yeah, Iran has vowed to take revenge. Do we know what that could possibly look like?
Well, if the New York Times report that was just published an hour or so ago is correct, this morning when there was an emergency meeting of the Supreme National Security Council, which is an elite body tasked to deal with vital national security and foreign policy issues. At this meeting, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, according to the New York Times and its sources, has ordered Iran to strike Israel directly. So this, of course, would present, a huge escalation potentially. But then again, we may see what we saw on April 13th with the unprecedented direct assault by Iran on Israel, which, there's a lot of confusion about that. But at the end of the day, the Israelis, together with the support of the United States and its regional partners, were able to defend Israel quite strongly. So maybe this kind of scenario going to be repeated, basically being a show of force from the Iranian side. But beyond that, of course, Iran can activate different components of its so-called axis of resistance. The Houthis in Yemen, who have also launched long-range missiles quite recently to Israel, but also pro-Iranian militias in Iraq and Syria, retargeting the U.S. military presence there, and of course, not least Hezbollah in the north of Israel. But then again, potentially not to the extent of, at the end of the day, the dilemma remains that Iran has to show a kind of face-saving response. But then again, it would be a huge risk to draw in the United States into the Middle East war, and also create a veritable northern front between Hezbollah and Israel, at the end of which Iran may lose its crown jewel, Hezbollah.
Let me just ask you about Hamas and Hezbollah, their faith and trust in the Iranian regime. I mean, it has to be shaken now, or how do you see it?
Well, there was some, shaking credibility all along since October 7th because of Iranian reluctance to strike, Israel directly. So this particular credibility problem amounted to the kind of Iranian direct assault that we saw on April 13th. So again, Yes, it's a credibility problem for the Islamic Republic, both with its inside supporter base, but also most notably within the axis of, the so-called axis of resistance. Right. But the Iranians, this credibility problem has to be dealt with. But then again, we cannot forget that there is a clear pattern of dependence one-sidedly. So that is to say that Hezbollah and Hamas are the ones who are dependent upon Tehran's support and not vice versa.
Okay. Ali Fathollah-Nejad, director of the Center for Middle East and Global Order, we appreciate your time and your analysis tonight. Thank you. Good seeing you again.
Thank you.
Well, the background to Haniyeh's killing is the war in Gaza between Hamas and Israel. The U.S. has been pressuring Israel to agree to a ceasefire, but the Israeli government has resisted. Haniyeh's death makes a ceasefire seem less likely than ever. Nevertheless, the Biden administration thinks that it's still possible. I want you to listen to what the U.S. National Security Council spokesman John Kirby said about that today.
We still believe there's a viable process. We still believe there's interested counterparts. And we still believe that there are meetings and discussions to be had. We wouldn't have a team over there right now if we didn't believe that it was possible to try to gather together and push this forward.
All right, let's stay in Washington now. Go to our correspondent, Janelle Dumalaon. She's following the story for us. So, Janelle, weakness and fear. Let's start with weakness. The fact that Israel was able to possibly carry out this assassination, the fact that the U.S. was unable to sway Israel to do something differently. U.S. influence on Israel is anything but strong. Is that what you are hearing right now in Washington?
Well, in a word, Brent, yes. And the fact that the U.S. did not know about this attack, that's according to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and that this attack was not coordinated by Washington, that kind of does seem a bit more indicative of the limited influence that the U.S. appears to have. But it's also worth noting out that this idea that the U.S. has been unable to exert influence on Israel effectively, it's worth pointing out that that has been a discussion here for a longer time. The U.S., for all its support of Israel, for its support of its military campaign, for all the diplomatic cover that the U.S. has provided at the UN and the UN Security Council, the fact that it stood by Israel in terms of helping it fend off attacks from Iran, the U.S. has been kind of like a passenger in this journey, and it's been unable to press Iran into achieving certain kind of goals, such as appearing more restrained or getting more humanitarian aid into Gaza. So Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was just here last week. He met with Biden, he met with Harris, he spoke before Congress, and the White House also made it clear then that what they wanted to see was Netanyahu's full backing of this ceasefire hostage release deal. He came and went without having given that backing, and that clearly shows you that he was not pressured to do that. But what everyone here is also aware of is that Benjamin Netanyahu, more than anything, is motivated by domestic concerns, by domestic pressures, his personal ambition, perhaps his goal of staying in power. And that is a square that Washington has not been able to circle.
Yeah, and now let's talk about the fear. The big fear is that the United States will be drawn into a wider war in the Middle East. Is there a sense in Washington tonight that that is indeed what could be happening now?
I mean, there's an argument to be made that a wider regional conflict was happening already. You have the Houthis in the Red Sea, you have Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria, and these tensions between Israel and Hezbollah. But of course, the fear that this could motivate Iran and its proxies to exact a very harsh response, of course, and drag the U.S. into a wider, into an even deeper conflict. Of course, that is a concern here. Now, for now, the White House is maintaining this line that a wider escalation is not necessarily inevitable. John Kirby, who whose quote we played there earlier in the show, he also said that today. But also worth noting that this is a region that is where the U.S. is very much represented. The White House has been saying that it still sees a diplomatic solution as the way forward for a more peaceful and secure region, but you can certainly tell that nerves are on edge here.
Yeah. Amazing though that they're taking the positive spin on this. We'll see if that's where events indeed take us. Janelle in Washington. Janelle, thanks for your reporting. Thank you.